Mr. Traverso, do you wish to make an opening statement at this time?
I do, Your Honor.
All right. You can stand up and take a break in place while we get reorganized there, folks, if you'd like to. If you're going to speak from the lectern, if you'd handle it around a little bit. All right, folks. Well, wait till you get your water loaded there. Okay, please now give your attention to Mr. Traverso, who speaks for Mr. Cox.
Good morning to you all. As the judge has said, I'm Nelson Traverso. I represent Francis Schaeffer Cox, and this is raw report. My investigator, Schaeffer, is here, and you've met everybody else.
Mr. Traverso, your microphone's pointed in the wrong direction. The fuzzy part goes up towards your chin.
No, sorry.
Thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
Okay. The testimony in this case will show that this is not about Francis Schaeffer Cox, the domestic terrorist, whose eye was on obtaining firearms and grenades to overthrow the government. This case is about the father of two, an avid outdoorsman who has climbed Denali 3 times, and is a young, idealistic, intelligent man who is a mix of agitator, civil disobedient, and outspoken critic who championed the fight for civil liberties. He did not walk outside with protest signs, camp outside government buildings, state or federal. He challenged head-on the very institutions designed to govern us: our legislature, the judiciary, and the executive branch. He ran for political office and barely lost an election. He challenged the authority, jurisdiction of the Alaska court system by filing paperwork challenging the very legitimacy of the court system. He challenged the executive branch by forming 2 organizations. First, the Second Amendment Task Force to protect further restrictions and to change how the 3 branches of government approach the right to bear arms. The evidence will show that in 2008 to 2009, there was concern that the economy and the government, both the economy would collapse and that the government would follow in its wake. Schaeffer encouraged a group of devout Christian men to come together to form a militia designed to protect its members and their families against mobs and a government turned inside out that would be unable to protect them. It was called the Alaska Peacemakers Militia. Its motto, defend all, aggress none. It was described as the family militia. The solemn oath of each member was to protect their families in the event that things fell apart. You will hear evidence that the militia is not a revolutionary armed front, but an organization that tries to get government to listen, whether it be the judiciary, legislature, or executive branch. But Schaeffer didn't stop there. He also spearheaded the formation of an organization called Liberty Bell, which monitors law enforcement with its own network so that a citizen can witness what takes place during an investigation. In one instance, he was called out to assist the Alaska State Troopers in calming a potentially explosive situation. The troopers thanked him. Unfortunately, in March of 2010, he was called upon to help someone through Liberty Bell, and in the process was arrested for not immediately disclosing that he had a gun in his possession. He chose that case to challenge all three branches of government. Approximately 3 to 4 weeks before his arrest for the weapons charge, late February of 2010, he was arrested for domestic assault. There will be testimony. He and his wife Marty argued because they were taking a trip to see his mother-in-law, whom he had a strained relationship with. An argument ensued, a domestic dispute that ultimately led to a misdemeanor conviction. He was contacted by the Office of Child Protective Services much later to interview their 2-year-old son. And for the sake of simplicity, we will say OCS. OCS states that this is a standard protocol. OCS wanted to interview their 2-year-old son. OCS states that this is a standard protocol in domestic violence reports. Schaeffer didn't have any problem with that, except he wanted to be present during the interview. He did not want the child removed from their presence. And when that occurred, and they rejected that plan, then he did not cooperate. Schaeffer believed this was wrong, and he refused contact. The dispute ensues for several months with OCS, and that would manifest into probing, surveillance, and trickery unforeseen by the family. The evidence in this case will show that Schaeffer began to draw attention of the federal government. He was invited to speak in a number of states, primarily in Montana. His speech in Hamilton in December of 2009 became known as the Solution Speech. It was a speech designed to raise awareness, not bloodshed. You will hear that Schaeffer colorfully describes that the country was headed to hell in a freight train, and eventually the government would collapse on its own. If that happened, chaos and/or tyranny would ensue, but liberty would eventually win. In other speeches, he would analogize that the government you don't need to gun down the beast. He describes it that you need to let it fall or collapse on its own. As he describes it, you don't kill a wounded bear. As the government fails and as it comes crashing down, the concept of law will be swept away with it. He spoke to people that they need to form a militia to protect themselves, create a common law court that will address the concerns of litigants, and organize networks like Liberty Bell to witness, monitor law enforcement. He didn't stop there either. He believed that our sovereignty as citizens is in peril, and believed that through the activity of the Alaska Assembly Posts, this would help educate and organize others to understand what the Founding Fathers wanted. Yet youth has its excesses. No, not that he wanted to overthrow the government, but occasionally, yes, he would display a big mouth to draw and to make a point. For example, while it might be morally right to drill a couple of rounds in the head of a judge, I do not feel it is necessary. Or, we have you outmanned and outgunned and can have you all dead in one night. Distasteful, but within his right to free speech. Schaeffer started to get reports that he was on a watch list, that people around Fairbanks contacted him and told him, clued him in, that federal officials had conveyed that he was dangerous. An airport police officer stopped him, not because of an infraction, but to disclose that he was on some terrorist-like list. He heard through a source that federal agents were being sent from the lower 48 to execute him. He was getting national and statewide attention, and he felt his message was reaching a lot of people. He was still embroiled in conflict with OCS, but he feared the federal government was out to silence him. And one day he went to Fort Wainwright, an army post, to seek help. He went there with his wife Marty and his son Seth. They eventually left there, but soon were contacted by a soldier. They went to the post to seek help from the provost marshal. When they left, they were contacted by a soldier from the provost office that federal officials had come to the post after them, that they wanted a video, audio of his request for assistance from the post. During that time, the soldier heard disturbing statements by the federal officials. They were talking that Schaeffer's dispute with OCS, which was ongoing from February through May to early June, would lead to a confrontation with law enforcement, and they would take him out. The soldier contacted Schaeffer and warned him what had happened. This is early June of 2010. Many things unfold after this date. The government, through the use of an informant from Anchorage who sold munitions, nicknamed Drop Zone Bill, came up to Fairbanks within weeks of the events at Fort Wainwright. He was tasked by the government to encourage Schaeffer to start an armed insurrection and use Schaeffer's battle with OCS as a means to justify this. The informant called Schaeffer to come over to Pike's Landing in Fairbanks. Bill keeps asking, what's Schaeffer's plan? What's your plan, Schaeffer? Come on, what's your plan? The informant said he had men mobilized to come here. He called them his assets. And that he had spent thousands of dollars to get this thing going. Two men had accompanied Schaeffer. Schaeffer discouraged armed conflict and made it clear that the mission of the militia was to defend all, aggress none. The very next day, the Interior Alaska Conservative Coalition sponsored a fundraiser at Far North Tactical, also known as Blondies. And Drop Zone Bill was there with a man named Aaron Bennett. Aaron Bennett is the owner of Far North Tactical. While this fundraiser was going on, Aaron Bennett and Bill Fulton were talking that Schaeffer had a plan. Schaeffer was not there at that point. But during this fundraiser, they kept talking to people. That there was a number of people that the plan would be executed on a Thursday, that it was coming up. There's something's going to happen. Schaeffer's got a plan. Schaeffer went there with another member of the militia and was alarmed at what was going on. Les Serby, the man who accompanied Schaeffer, made it clear that the APM, the Alaska Peacemakers Militia, had no plan for armed conflict. Fulton reached for Serby and had to be stopped by a number of people. Schaeffer became very concerned that either Fulton or Bennett or both were out of control. The government, a couple months later, in August of 2010, have another informant, J.R. Olson. They had him tasked to become a member of the Alaska Peacemaker Militia at a barbecue at the residence of Coleman Barney. The APM had an open-door policy, and there was no reason to bar the admission of anyone. It is not a clandestine military organization, but from that day forward, through the direction of the government, J.R. Olson, as he was called, was to encourage the purchase of munitions, which were legal if purchased by someone who was licensed to do so. JR's mission was to instigate the militia toward armed conflict. No matter how many times Schaeffer would say, "We're not about that," he would always say, "But what do you do if you get arrested? What do they do if you capture you?" And Schaeffer would always try to calm him down. From August 2010 to November of 2010, nothing transpired, yet the government continued to push Schaeffer's case involving the weapons charge, continued to push for some sort of violence. Schaeffer's case involving the weapons charge that arose during a Liberty call became the center point of his effort to challenge the court system. The evidence will show that the government used that too, but to encourage conflict, despite Schaeffer's emphatic, explicit instructions that was not the purpose of the militia. As a result of his decision not to show to his court hearing on the 14th on the weapons charge, a bench warrant for his arrest was issued. In meeting after meeting with militia members, he explains that he could not go to court as that would mean he would submit to their jurisdiction. Despite this, JR repeatedly tried to get Schaeffer to have an attack plan in play. The evidence will show he rejected this over and over again. Schaeffer stated that he wanted the militia to produce paperwork and to engage in nonviolent shenanigans. The evidence will show also that Schaeffer Cox was trying to leave the state soon after a meeting with some of the militia. The evidence will show that he was planning to leave the state with his family because he was scared that the provocation of Bennett and Fulton and the government's presence shortly after going to the post was a telltale sign that he needed to abandon. For now, his challenges to the court jurisdiction in the weapons charge and get his family out of Fairbanks as soon as he could. The informant offered the services of a tractor trailer driver who was on his way up to Alaska from the lower 48. The informant was tasked to lie to him about the truck's need for repairs to keep Schaeffer here long enough for the government to try to sell firearms and grenade bodies or grenades to him. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I ask you to keep an open mind. The testimony in this case will show an incredible overreach by the government on March 10, 2011. The testimony will show that they manufactured, I should say concocted, a scheme to put inert grenades and 22s with a silencer in the hands of Francis Schaeffer Cox and Coleman Barney. The informant is told to make sure you put it in their hands. Why did they have to do that? Again, I ask why. We will show you why they did what they did. As you listen to the testimony in this case, and as the case concludes, remember this refrain: it is dangerous to be right when the government is wrong. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Traverso. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take our morning recess at this point. I want to remind you again, as I did yesterday, not to discuss the case with each other or anyone else, and follow all my instructions about recesses. And we'll reconvene in about 15 minutes. You may be excused. I think you go out to the jury room.
All rise. This matter is in recess for 15 minutes.